Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we have John with us. Would you like to tell us a bit about you?
I'm John. I've been making typology videos since I was 14. I'm 14? I don't know, maybe 15. I'm 24 now. First video I ever made was a socionics video, and then kind of drifted away from that. And since then, I've drifted away from even the way that Jung talks about type. I'm currently making videos about type theory and kind of presenting it from an ancient and modern symbolism.
Yeah, and I'll have his channel linked below. In true TI fashion, you've created your own model of how you see type. So I'm going to be excited to hear about it. And so, John, you have very, as you call it, weird definition of the functions. And so I'm curious, how do you define them?
Oh gosh, all of them just right now? Okay, so thinking, feeling, start there. Thinking is rigorous judgment in favor of coherence, with the aim of coherence. And feeling is merciful judgment in favor of completeness. Extroversion and introversion, you could consider extroversion as a move of attention from the unity of a thing to the multiplicity. And that can mean the inside of a thing versus the outside of a thing, because the inside of a thing will tend towards unity, and the outside will tend towards multiplicity, because there's always more outside of something than within it. And then introversion is obviously the reverse of that, a tendency towards unity and the inside rather than multiplicity in the outside. And then sensing and intuition. The word I use for sensing is a technical kind of word. You could use kind of a technical word, or you could use an ancient kind of religious word. So sensing would be potential or earth, that which fills substances. And intuition is the pattern and the top down heaven of a thing. So intuition is attentive to the patterns of a thing, that which kind of unify phenomenon, allow them to be even perceivable. And then sensation is what you perceive underneath that pattern. So visible and invisible is even one way of talking about that, visible being sensation and invisible being intuition.
Solid definitions. Wholeheartedly agree with them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, on board. There's this really amazing quality when both NE and TI meet together in a marriage. It brews and brews, and then it creates this very unique way of seeing a theory. It's really a bullseye on, because you notice the areas in which it could be more accurate, and so you theorize and theorize until you reach a better way of seeing things.
Michael has an excellent summation of the NTP attitude, which is the discovery of axioms. They want to discover the perfect axioms, and then they kind of think like, once we have that, everything is just right. So precision is what they look for, because if you get the right axiom, they think that like any piece of knowledge will be able to fit under that system.
Yeah, and then it results in NTPs creating their own system understanding or theoretical model of type. You'll see this with John Beebe or Linda Barron's Kiersey, all ENTPs or INTPs who take MBTI and then, or Jungian theory, and then twist it into their own model. And so John, do you have any other definitions for things? So you defined the dichotomies broadly and the introverted and extroverted spectrum broadly. Do you have different definitions for each of the individual functions as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, and like the theory starts to get interesting. I think it might be important to talk about how these definitions differ from traditional Jungian definitions before I get into the 8 functions and the derivation of that. Because, yeah, so thinking and feeling I define differently from Jung. He actually, in a different place in his notes on Zarathustra, he gave a kind of a seminar course on Zarathustra. He has a term, eros and logos. And my definitions of thinking and feeling are actually much closer to how he presents eros and logos there. So he associates thinking and feeling with particular contents, which I have a problem with, which is to say he associates thinking with thoughts, like logically structured thoughts, and feeling with emotions, which I think is very problematic for how we think about the functions, because I feel that a lot of people suffer, like genuinely suffer, trying to determine whether they have something like extroverted feeling or introverted feeling, because they feel that one is not empathetic, or one is selfish, or one is heartless. And it's like, bro, like emotions don't have to enter into this discussion at all. So yeah, that's an important departure for me. The second important departure is the definition of introversion as attention to the impression formed upon the subject by the object. That would be introversion's interest, whereas extroversion's interest is the object itself. And yeah, this is problematic because it ends up locating meaning in the subject. It locates unity in the subject, and unity and meaning are kind of, in a sense, synonymous. The meaning of something is that which allows you to see it as one thing. But locating it in the subject creates this vision of reality, in which meaning is projected onto the outside world more or less arbitrarily by the subject. And that's kind of a vision of reality, which I think currently is collapsing in on itself.
I enjoy the fine precision you put into your defining. And a phrase that you really like to say, John, is, well, and that's problematic. And I find that to be a very TI phrase, because it's seeing the logic and why it's problematic to think a certain way or to have certain axioms. And I just thought I'd point it out because it's a quirk. And so you mentioned about logos, and was it ethos or
Eros?
Eros, and how it's closer to your definition of thinking and feeling. So I'm wondering, what is logos and what is eros?
So logos, as Jung presents it in the Zarathustra lectures, logos is that which makes the cut, and eros is that which includes and draws together. And I think this is a really great way of thinking about thinking and feeling. Because thinking excludes. And thinking, so the precise definition of this, my definition of thinking is not just rigorous judgment in favor of coherence. Like that's the kind of like Cliff Notes version of it. The fuller definition of it is that there is an aspect to everything which exists, which is going to host the purpose explicitly. So there's going to be an aspect to a chair, which is going to host the purpose of the chair, which is to be sat upon. And then there may also be aspects of the chair which do not host the purpose of the chair. Those will look like either idiosyncrasies that don't belong to the chair. That's kind of what thinking is going to say. It's like, cut those away. Like, we don't need those. Those aren't going to enter into our judgment. Or those can be ornamental aspects. That's kind of the feeling move. The feeling was like, no. The ornamental aspects are relevant, and we're going to integrate them into the chair. So yeah, what thinking does is it cuts away the fluff. What I'm presenting right now is also more introverted thinking, because I'm staying with one. I'm staying with the chair, and I have the unity above it, and then I'm cutting away the multiplicity below. If we wanted to take an extroverted thinking approach to the judgment of the chair, it's more difficult with the chair. Let's say like a car. It's going to be, can this create coherences outside of itself? And those coherences would be like, can this make me continue to host my pattern? Can my body continue to host my spirit through using this car? And that sounds like kind of like spiritual and metaphysical, but all it's saying is like, can this like allow me to go to the store and buy food so I can eat? And can this car, get my kids to school or whatever? Like these are all coherences between spirit and body that allow the world to keep on existing. And that's why extroverted thinking has its relationship to practicality. So that's logos, right? Is cutting away and creating coherence, right? Eros is drawing together, and it has a connection to mercy as well. And there is a way in which, and it has a connection to beauty as well, right? Beauty, eroticism, it's the same word, eros. In Christian theology, the way in which something is created, this will sound very abstract, but it has an analogy to like the human level, is that non-being falls in love with being, and that's how the universe is created. So it is created through eros, and then the logos kind of judges it. And so in Genesis, we'll have God speaking the word, the non-being falls in love, and then the judgment, this is good. That's the logos part comes in. The analogy to how just everyday things are created is that if you have a pile of sticks and wood and nails, right? It's not a chair. It's a pile of wood. It is at a certain level. It has a level of non-being. It is not a chair, kind of simply. And if you start with thinking, you don't end up with a chair. But if you start with eros, with beauty, with mercy, and you call the chair into chairness, if you call non-being into being, you end up with a chair. So it says, I accept this, which is not what it should be, and draw it into what it should be. And that's the move of feeling. And so that's why you'll have like introverted feeling types who resist something like the corporate world, in which the elements of a company, so like the parts of the chair, aren't in love with the purpose of the company. They're just kind of like acting as dregs. Like that's something which is antithetical to their nature. It's like to them, it's like you're breaking how the world exists. My primary vision of how the world exists, which is for the bottom parts to be in love with the unity, which brings them together.
I was surprised by the word choice, eros, because I think in Greek it's erotic love or sexual love. So I'm like, that with the feeling functions, that's an interesting kind of correlation. I like how when you define the functions, you're more defining the essence of the functions rather than giving any sort of behavioral cues. It's really what the functions really are. And so I'm wondering about what other hot takes you'd like to, or like whatever. You're just a hot take and a human being because you have strong TI. So, but yeah, what are some views on type that you uniquely have?
That I uniquely have.
You're like, what are
these? Okay. So this is where I will probably sound a little crazy, but I think that it's like a extremely deep language type. Michael and I have been talking, and one of the things he said is that like Jung discovered a way back into ancient symbolism for modern people, and I think it happened through type, at least in one avenue, because the functions form a cross, right? It's intuition would be at the top, sensation at the bottom, mercy, feeling would be, what would that be, on the right hand, right? And thinking would be on the left hand, rigor would be on the left hand. And that has to do with some symbolism of coming towards, but you eat with your right hand, right? You draw towards yourself with your right hand, and in traditional cultures, you clean yourself with your left hand. You say go away with your left hand. So that's the mercy rigor idea. So it forms a cross. It forms this very basic organization of reality, right? And it's an organization of reality which is something that ancient people would have just imbibed, and they wouldn't have been able to describe, like I'm describing now with words like potential and pattern and whatnot. But I think when we say, like, the basic biblical account of creation, of in the beginning God created heaven and earth, right? I think it's talking about the same thing: heaven, pattern, earth, potential. And the Genesis account is the beginning of laying out how reality exists. And as the Bible progresses, you start to see the corollaries, like thinking ends up being associated with fire in the Bible. It burns off, it cuts away, and it's also the center of the civilization, right? It's the meeting place where the coherence happens, and the feeling ends up being associated with water, because if you are too much of a feeling person, if reality is too merciful, you end up with confusion, right? You end up with mixtures between categories which shouldn't be there. And that is, that's like what happens in Genesis 6 when we have the meeting of the sons of God with the daughters of men, and then you get the flood, right? So that's the beginning of that hot take. I recommend, if people are still watching, Matthew Peugeot has a book called The Language of Creation. It's talking about this stuff, and he presents this four-sided view of creation with heaven, earth, and then space and time. Time being associated more with the feeling function, and space being associated more with the thinking function. That is a very important book for people to read if they want to understand type better. It makes no reference to type, but I think it's very important to read.
Yeah. Could you describe to us the delineation between that book and type? So what makes time more feeling and what makes space more thinking?
So feeling, the way he presents time in biblical cosmology is not the just kind of duration. It's not duration. It's transformation into something else, right? So it's night turns into day, day turns into night. It is the transformation of something which is not into something which is. So that's how I presented the chair, right? Is that it is a non-being becoming being through mercy. And yeah, so time is cyclical change is how it would be presented in biblical cosmology. One of the things here, and Matthew's brother Jonathan is always like very angry when people talk about Christianity having linear time, whereas other cool religions like your Hopi religions will have cyclical time. It's like no. Christianity has cyclical time and linear time. Anyways. And then space is not just like extension in biblical cosmology. Space is habitable space. So that's the space in which you can dwell, the space in which heaven and earth can meet, and there's not a confusion there. So that's one of the really interesting things. You can see this in how introverted thinking and extroverted thinking differ, but they still relate to space. Is that introverted thinking is interested in the foundation stone, right? So this is a very, very basic symbol of space. The foundation stone is the stone that you place first, and then the rest of the building is a model after that stone, right? It's kind of a macrocosm of that stone. So that's how NTPs are interested in axioms for a system, and STPs are interested in the single place of coherence within a system. That goes into an SENI, NESI difference, but they're interested in axioms. And they think like once you have the axiom, you have it. Extroverted thinking is going to say to introverted thinking, no, you have to actually build the building. So its use can be established in multiplicity, sort of on Earth.
That's fascinating. You made a mention between cyclical time and linear time and how the Bible essentially has both of these. And I noticed sometimes with TI, they'll explain to you their conclusion. So they're like you just said, it has both cyclical and linear time. And I'm like, wait, I don't have your axiom, so I don't know how you got there.
Sure. So, okay, let's, basic image of that is the days of the week. Right, is the Sabbath cycle. Like there's this little cycle of rest and work within the week that happens in the Torah. But then there's also an image of progression. We start at a place. We start at the garden and we end in the New Jerusalem. So we are in this little cycle, but it's also moving towards something. So it's like kind of like a spiral, right? But the New Jerusalem is also, it has the tree in the center. So it's also an image of the garden, right? And it's also an image of the crucifixion. So it's this, I don't know how to do it. It's this big cycle that you're progressing within somehow. Yeah. That gets into mysticism and stuff, which is, I don't know. Your audience may be familiar with type theory, but I don't know how much Christian mysticism they want on this podcast.
Let's go down that hole. Are you a Christian mystic, or is it just a thought you entertain for a moment?
I am not a mystic. It would be it would be pre-less to call myself a mystic. I'm a barely Christian in my practice. I go to an Eastern Catholic church, but yeah, I'm a neophyte practically. I've been back for 4 years, back in the faith for 4 years, trying to figure out how to repent and whatnot. So yeah, I would not call myself a mystic. Interested in mysticism though.
And I notice like with TI users, sometimes they'll explain to you their end conclusion, or like, oh, I believe in cyclical, but not linear. Like these are examples, right? Or like they'll say this is problematic, or that doesn't make sense. But sometimes like other people are missing the steps to get to where the TI user is talking about. Because the axioms can feel self-evident. And so sometimes they'll just say the conclusions because it's like, well, duh, like that is the truth. And then everyone else is like, what is that TI user thinking? I'm so confused as to how they got to that conclusion. But it's because it's like logic that doesn't feel like it always has to be voiced. And it's like, but they'll voice it once you ask them to voice it. They're like, oh, okay, those were the pieces that we were missing to understand what you were saying. Cool. Yeah.
Do you want to like present how you're hearing what I'm saying? Because I don't know how I'm.
No, it's completely. Seeing. No, it's amazing. Everything you're saying is solid gold. It's it's just that there's the mercy coming in of the feeling. Just like, hey, no, you're doing so great. And yeah. It all makes sense. I just noticed with TI, initially people are like, huh? And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it after the explanation comes. Okay, whereas TE, actually, they do tend to, or sometimes they do outright just say the end thing too, but they tend to also just explain out loud what they think. Or maybe that's wrong, but yeah. Feel free to correct me. Yeah.
I think with TE users, I always get the feeling they don't have to go back 30 steps in their thinking to give you the explanation of why something's wrong. They sort of have it's almost more self-evident to them. It's like, no, just like, look, it doesn't work for this reason. It's not scientific, or it's not, useful or whatever. Yeah. So I'm sort of jealous of TE types sometimes, in that they can have such like forward, strong convictions and be like, this is why it's wrong. And I'm just like, okay, like, maybe if your axioms are different, but yeah.
Yeah. The TE types can have a sense of surety or just a natural confidence to their statements. Yeah. Even sometimes when they haven't fully thought it. Yeah. But yeah, with TI, they do have to go back 30 steps to explain why they thought a certain thought. And so sometimes it is easier just to say the conclusion of their thought too.
Yeah.
That is an interesting difference between TE and TI. And so I'm wondering, how does this parallel with FE and FI, in your opinion?
Right. So if we talk about like the mercy thing, the extroverted feeling type, for them, the thing which the person that they're affirming should align with is outside of that person, right? It's like, I will have mercy on you so that you can participate in this group. Whereas for the introverted feeling thing, it's like the thing that they are extending mercy towards you is like who you ideally are, right? Like your inner like perfection. They want you to see what you're called to more than your alignment with something outside of yourself. And I feel like that can be more difficult for them to convey.
Yeah. And just as for the introverted feeling, the introverted thinking, they both have 30 layers deep in their own way. So maybe FI has a harder time with conveying the Eros material because it's 30 layers deep. And it's hard to
Sorry.
No worries. And it's hard to convey something that's 30 layers deep. And so that's just conjecture, right? And I can tell when you're TIing because then like you're looking around in your brain. You're actually like scanning, your eyes are scanning to see if you agree or not. Cool. All right. And so you were on quite the type journey. You went from identifying as an INTP to ENTP. So I'm wondering what caused the shift? What were some points that made you identify with ENTP over INTP?
It's hard for me to, I think the lack of precision in my thought. It was probably IDR Labs, which was at the time Celebrity Types, was talking about those things which wake up the type, which bring the type up for air. They described how extroverted intuition comes up for air. It's like, oh, finally, someone I can talk to, like someone who understands some sort of thing that I've been thinking about. It's like, I need to like come up and like hug this person intellectually. I was like, that's definitely more what I am, rather than needing time to organize things into a coherent pattern. Yeah, and so for a lot of ENTPs, it's right, the feeling of being alienated from normal groups, normal settings, and they kind of like go off by themselves and be like, okay, I'm an INTP, or I've actually met 2 ENTPs recently who identify as INFP because they're just too edgy, yeah. I joke sometimes saying that I am the apostle to the ENTPs, because I've had a lot of experiences with ENTPs, kind of helping them see faith in a different light, and so it's these INFP ENTPs that I've been encountering. I've had those experiences with them, so yeah, I'm like St. Paul to the ENTPs.
That's amazing. You're doing good work out there.
Yeah.
In what ways?
The question? Sorry.
No worries. With NE, you never really have to answer the original question.
Okay, yeah.
It's never about the original question.
Right.
It's about the journey where it takes you.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so in what ways do you help shepherd the ENTP?
Well, okay, so a lot of ENTPs feel very alienated, right? And I've definitely been one of those ENTPs. They feel so. One of the actually is showing them that there's a place for the monstrous in the life of faith. That's one of the primary things that I think is important for an ENTP. That sounds kind of weird, but the ENTP is interested in the strange and is interested in things which don't fit. Not as much, I think, as the ENFP. I think the ENTP has more of a desire to integrate those things which don't fit into a holistic whole, into a larger pattern. So ENTPs themselves feel like that thing which does not fit. And so the story of St. Christopher is one thing that I've shared with a few ENTPs, of how like this monstrous giant, sometimes dog-headed saint has this place in the church to be on the boundary and to be a sort of guardian and protector, and a strange figure that still can participate in the life of faith. So yeah.
Got it. That's a good story. So you mentioned how ENTPs feel alienated. Well, what is the root cause for that, would you say?
I think they want connection, but they want it in a honest way, maybe is one way of talking about it. Yeah, and I think the authenticity and the honesty can be too much for people who just want to, drink their cup of coffee and talk about the weather and sports, and which are not bad things to talk about, but the ENTP wants to bring those differences to light, those painful areas of difference, because I think the ENTP really believes in the power of truth to bring people together. I think that's one of the core features of the ENTP, is that they think if we are honest, that the truth will reconcile everything, that nothing is in itself bad. It just needs to be in its proper place.
That level of radical honesty is rarely found in the world. And so, yeah, it seems like there's a little bit of wanting to stay away from small talk that you talk about too. It's like, I don't want to have just mundane everyday chit chat. I want to be able to discuss things that matter. Because when you can uncover the axioms, the really important fundamental principles of things, you realize that certain things matter and certain things just don't, because your brain is just gravitating towards understanding such a core aspect of reality that other things can seem minute in comparison to your brain's aim, what your brain is seeking to solve. I don't know.
I think INTJs are more constitutionally incapable of small talk than the ENTP. I think the ENTP has a mode that they can go into of like, okay, let's talk about sports, like whatever, like all.
Yeah, let's test this. We're just for the next minute.
But the INTJ is incapable of condescension. They're like, no. I care about these things, and everything else is irrelevant. I think that goes back to what I was saying about the ENTP's belief that nothing is bad in itself. It just needs to be in the proper place. Like the ENTP is fine with small talk if it's in its proper place. But if you're doing small talk at the therapist's office, it's like, it's not the time, right? I think that's a feature of ENTPs. I think that's NTP SFJ generally. I think that those types have a tendency to see things as more similar, right? And basically a non-particularity comes about with the NTP SFJs. It's like, no, it's really all part of this one overarching thing. Whereas the NTJ SFPs can be like, this is in, this is out, more aggressively.
How about the NFJs and the STPs?
In terms of small talk or in terms of particularity?
Particularity? Particularity?
I think, so Michael, in his book, I can't remember where he places them, but they have a sort of bounded non-particularity, right? So they're not going to reject certain things within what they're looking at as unable to participate in the system, but they are also not going to extend what they're looking at into other areas, right? So if we're talking about human nature, the STP NFJ type is going to say, yes, there is good and evil in everyone, and it's this holistic thing, but they're not going to say that like, oh, that's just like everything else, where there's a meeting of two opposites, right? That would be more STP SFJ. And the NFPs and NFP STJs are like just total chaos. It's just like we're we're unbounding the system. We're going to look at everything, and it's all going to be different all at the same time. It's just like, whoa. I don't know how NFP STJs function in such a chaotic universe.
That is quite hilarious. Yes. And so, John, yeah, any last takes you want to add? Anything? So
the really crazy thing I was getting to earlier is that I think, and this is out there, and I haven't fully brought it in to the level of coherence and codification, but in Revelation there is an image of God seated on this throne, surrounded by these elders. There's this beast or collection of beasts, which is similar to what's in Ezekiel. The what is it? The Ophanim? I don't know. It's these 4 beasts: human, lion, bull, and eagle, and they have eyes on the inside and the outside of their heads, essentially. In some translations, it'll say in front and behind, but I think inside and outside also works. And these four beasts, I think, correspond to the 4 functions, and the inside and outside obviously corresponds to introversion and extroversion. So I think that image, which is in Revelation, is an image of consciousness in general. Since if man is made in the image of God, then if we're looking at the image of God, we're looking at sort of a higher fractal version of what man is, right? So that's sort of a meta image of consciousness, and I think those 4 beasts correspond to the functions, and so that's kind of the crazy thing about type theory, is that it's like it's that deep in consciousness. It's like biblically deep in consciousness. So that's my last hot take.
Yeah, so type and biblical faith and word, or the Bible, have a lot in common, or like overlaps. Yeah,
I think so. I wanted to kind of defend my mix of religious language with typological language. I'm not doing this just to be an evangelist and to be an annoying Christian. Like, I'm doing this because I think Christianity is talking about consciousness. So like that's what Christianity is about consciousness and about transformation of consciousness. That sounds so new agey, but and so that language is useful for talking about type theory, which is also about consciousness.
Interesting. So I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, what are some areas in which biblical language or biblical texts overlap with type? So what are some of the areas of overlap you see between it showing qualities of type? I know you've said a lot of them already, but I was wondering if you had any more you wanted to go over.
I think that the cross is interesting. I mean, I use that image of everything that Jonathan Peugeot created in my videos, where you see the crucifixion in the center on top of this mountain, surrounded by these stars, and in that image, there's a judgment happening as well, right? The thief to the right comes in, and the thief to the left goes away, right? So we have the thinking, feeling, movement, as well as the feet, right? There's, in the traditional cross, there's a lower bar, and then there's a bar above, right? So there's the feet, and then there's the name, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. So that corresponds to the N and the S thing, right? And then you have the heart. So that's also one place where I think it's important to add religious understanding to type theory, because type theorists can, type theorists can tend towards this view of self-helpness, which is not bounded, not grounded in anything. I think it's important to have a religious understanding to point towards the ultimate purpose of every type, because the ultimate purpose, I think, is to enter into the heart, that place that mediates between the 4 functions. And so that's something like the hesychastic practice of the Jesus prayer offers that, I think, really places type in its proper place.
Yeah, beautifully said, John. Beautifully said. Thanks for coming out and offering your TI hot takes on the type theory. It's really great.
Yeah.
I think that your definitions are much more precise than how people typically talk about type. So I give you double thumbs up for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joyce.
Yeah. And I'll have his channel linked below. It's nice to have NTPs on my YouTube channel because they always offer a refreshing take on type. They always make sure that they clean slice the understanding so that it's more precise and accurate. And we need that. We need more people looking over the axioms of a type and reevaluating the core axioms in which we operate. So we need the Johns of the world.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it's nice that you add a bend of religion to type 2. And that's a new way of looking at type. And I know, like, as you said, a lot of people take the self-help route in type. And so you offer this nuanced take. You can also relate type back to religion. And so it gets people to think in ways that they haven't thought before. And so thanks for that, NETI.
You're welcome.
Awesome. And so thanks, audience members, for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode.